Welcome to Chapter 12. The topic of this chapter is cluster analysis. Cluster analysis is a kind of unsupervised learning. It is used to identify unknown groups inherent in data. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to explain what clustering is and why it is useful. The concept of distance and distance-based clustering. What kmeans clustering and how to implement kmeans clustering. As the first section, let me explain what cluster analysis is. In this course, I use the words cluster analysis and clustering interchangeably. Clustering is a method of machine learning that divides data into groups called clusters. When we analyze data, grouping observations into some similar groups is sometimes more efficient than treating all observations as unique entity. But sometimes we do not know how to divide data. In such a case, clustering is a useful way to find how to group our data. Clustering algorithms will find some patterns or structures in unlabeled data. It quantifies similarities between observations and then divides observations into groups based on similarities. These groups are called clusters. Each cluster consists of similar observations, and observations in different clusters are dissimilar. Practical use cases of cluster analysis include customer segmentation, grouping symptoms of unknown disease, and grouping objects in a photograph. Some of you may think that clustering and classification are similar because both of them divide observations into some groups. However, they are different methods. Classification is a supervised learning method, so there is a label in data. In classification, the label represents groups that the observations will be divided into. So, classification is a method that divides observations into predefined groups. On the other hand, clustering is an unsupervised learning method, so there's no label in data. So, there's no predefined groups that observations will be divided into. Therefore, we do not know how to divide observations in such a case. So, clustering is a method that divides observations into unknown groups. As an example, let's consider a case where we want to divide workers into some groups. If we want to divide them based on their job categories, we can predefine their job categories, such as administrator, engineer, and salesperson. This is a classification because it divides data into predefined categories. Next, let's consider a case where we want to divide workers based on their occupational interest. But we do not have predefined categories of their occupational interest, and we do not know how to categorize their occupational interest. In such a case, we can use cluster analysis to group data based on underlying patterns in their occupational interest. We do not need a label variable, but we need predictor variables that characterize the worker's occupational interest. Using features related to the worker's occupational interest, a clustering algorithm finds patterns to categorize the workers into some occupational interest clusters. So, what is the benefit of grouping data points into some clusters? Let's consider a case where we run advertisement to our customers. Each customer has different preferences, so uniform advertisement may not be effective. But perfect personalization, that is, running a different advertisement to each customer, is too costly. So, to balance the effectiveness and efficiency, we should divide our customer to some segments based on their preferences and purchase patterns. And then, we take different approach to each segments. So, in many cases, group by analysis provide us with better insights than simply analyzing the aggregated data. But sometimes we do not know how to divide our data into subgroups. In such a case, we can use cluster analysis to meaningfully divide data into groups. If we divide data into only a few clusters, each cluster contains many observations, and diversity of observations within a cluster is relatively high. On the other hand, if we divide data into many small clusters, each cluster will be highly distinctive each other. However, if we divide data too much and each clusters become too small, each cluster is almost the same as a single observations, and it becomes no better than perfect personalization. So, it is no better than case-by-case approach. Therefore, we need to divide data into the appropriate number of clusters, not too many, nor too few. We will be back to this issue in the later section. Now, we understand the benefit of grouping data points into some clusters. By the way, why do we need to perform cluster analysis? Suppose we have customer data and we want to obtain clusters using age and income data. Both age and income are numerical variables, so we can set two criteria for grouping: high or low age groups and high or low income groups. Then, we can divide the observations into four groups by two criteria. But here, a problem exists. How to set the criteria? Where should we split age into high or low? And where should we split income, high or low? A possible solution is to split data by the median. So let's divide the data by the medians. Here is a scatter plot that plots customers by age and income. And the scatter plot is divided by the medians, depicted as red lines. So we have four groups depicted as these cells. Since this grouping is based on high or low, the most representative observations for each group are located at the corner of each cell. However, as we can see, there are few observations at the corners of upper two cells. Rather, the observations are concentrated at the center of the scatter plot. So, this grouping does not capture the notable patterns in this data. If we apply a clustering algorithm to this data, it reveals three clusters, as shown in the scatter plot. In the previous slide, we divided the data into four groups, but the clustering algorithm identifies only three clusters. Besides, the boundaries between the clusters are not horizontal and vertical lines. So, the grouping criteria is different from what we supposed. That is, the clustering algorithm found some unknown patterns in data. There are various types of clustering algorithms. Broadly, They can be classified into hierarchical clustering and non-hierarchical clustering. Hierarchical clustering divides data into clusters with a hierarchical tree-like structure. That is, individual clusters can be integrated into more broad clusters. Hierarchical clustering can be further classified into agglomerative and divisive clustering. Agglomerative clustering is a bottom-up approach. First, each observation consists of a cluster with only one observation. Then, multiple clusters, that is, multiple observations, are merged into broader clusters. These clustering processes move up and forming a tree-like hierarchy. Divisive clustering is a top-down approach. First, all observations belong to one cluster. Then, they are split into multiple clusters. These clustering processes move down and forming a tree-like hierarchy. Non-hierarchical clustering divides data into mutually exclusive clusters. Non-hierarchical clustering can be further classified into density-based clustering and distance-based clustering. In density-based clustering, observations are clustered based on density. In distance-based clustering, observations are clustered based on distance. In this chapter, we focus on non-hierarchical clustering, and among them, distance-based clustering. Thank you for watching. Please thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.